Well, the visa extension agreement will benefit both China and the U.S. The nations still differ on some other issues. For more on the current state of relations, we're joined by Ivan Eland. He's a senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Thanks for joining us from Florida.
Thanks, Elaine.
You know, there was a feeling of optimism after President Xi Jinping and President Obama met in the Sunnylands last year. We talked about that with Nathan. How would you classify China-U.S. relations right now following this bilateral meeting at APEC?
Well, I think it's certainly hopeful. You know, you've just been covering the visa agreement, the climate change, and of course the U.S. and China have a very deep economic relationship with trade investment. But the one sticking point, I think, is the strategic relationship. And the U.S. still runs a neo-containment policy against China. It doesn't like to call it that, but it has a far-forward military presence in East Asia. And I think China would like to expand its security perimeter a little bit. And, there's a rising power, China, and a status quo power, the United States. And this has been a problem throughout world history. However, this is not like Germany or France that have a common border, or Germany and Russia back in the world wars when they were in the same neighborhood. China and the U.S. have a big ocean separating them, and it's more like Britain and the United States were back in the 1800s. And I think Britain who was the dominant power, allowed the U.S. to rise peacefully. And I think that's what the U.S. should do with China, because that big ocean provides some security. Nations get nervous about their security, and I think China's nervous about its security, and the U.S. is nervous. And the U.S. has this extended defense perimeter, but I think a big ocean would permit the U.S. to let China rise peacefully, as Britain did the U.S. in the 19th century.
And, you know, you wrote about that exact thing in an article called "The U.S. Should Give China Breathing Room to Rise Peacefully, and the U.S. Should Back Off." So how long would it get to the point between China and the U.S. to get to, say, U.S.-British relations? I mean, can you give some examples of how they can get there?
Well, I think that the U.S., many of these alliances that the U.S. has are bilateral. You don't have a multilateral NATO alliance in East Asia, but you have the U.S.-Japan, U.S.-South Korea, U.S.-Australia, U.S.-Philippines alliances, and an informal alliance with Taiwan. So you have all these alliances ringing China, and these are all military alliances. And I think it's time to reassess these. The Cold War is long over with. And I think that these countries are wealthy, and they should do more for their own defense. And they're not going to be doing it if the U.S. is providing, or at least doing most for their defense. And so I think the U.S. could start by saying, in 5 years, these countries, we're going to wean you away from our umbrella, and you're going to have to do more on your own. And also, I think we need to get rid of the troop presence in South Korea. The South Koreans have 30 times the GDP of the North. They can defend themselves. The Japanese are wealthy. The Taiwanese are wealthy. And so, you know, these countries really need to step up to the plate. And I think that would be less threatening to China than the U.S. presence.
Might be getting ahead of myself here, but, you know, the U.S. president has 2 years left on his term. Do you think that this momentum, if you will, could continue past 2 years, regardless of who the next president would be?
It could be. I think that there's one thing preventing a new Cold War between the U.S. and China, and that is the extensive economic relationship that the two countries have. The U.S. didn't have that with the Soviet Union, and I think you saw that operating in 2001 when there was the spy plane incident. I think that was settled peacefully, and I think that's the model for the future. Because when you have these types of things happen, you need to have a way to solve them, and you need an economic basis for the relationship, because there's no guarantee that war is not going to occur, because wars have occurred between countries with a lot of trading relationships.